Well, good morning, everybody. It's Pentecost Sunday, and last week we started talking about conflict, and I used some global examples. It was inspired by the Israel-Palestine conflict that is ongoing. But I want to bring it more local because sometimes, often, global conflicts can seem um, abstract. There's nothing we directly have to do with them. We elect our politicians, and the politicians tend to deal with that, especially if it's an international conflict. But I do think there's something unfolding here locally that was going to happen very slowly and peaceably, but has now happened very quickly. And communities like St. Andrews are particularly well equipped to flavor the conversation and ensure that the conflict that is coming is healthy rather than unhealthy. And I do think this is going to be a calling of ours in the coming years. And this is particularly appropriate on Pentecost and Pentecost in 2021, but we'll come back to that in a bit. What I want to talk about today is sort of equalization and vacuums. As a rural culture, over the past 50, 100 years, a vacuum has been created. When I first arrived here, Tweed was sort of at a bit of a low. Particularly Tweed. Hastings County sort of is what it is, but particularly Tweed was at a low point. Rural communities have sort of been losing jobs and people and culture for about 60 years now, 75 years. But they'd also gone through a pretty, well, the Russell William murders were about 2 or 3 years before I arrived. They rocked the country, but this is where they happened. And so they really rocked the town. And morale was at an all-time low. And what I noticed was that there was a lot of grieving happening. When I asked people what their vision for Tweed was, and I made a point to ask anybody, it was always bring back X. We used to have a big Ministry of Natural Resources office here that was really well appreciated. So bring back the Ministry of Natural Resources, or bring back the veneer plant, or the steel works, or whatever. It was always backwards looking. It was very much grieving what had been lost. There wasn't a lot of forward thinking, and that's happening more and more as people are working through their grief of what they've lost, but also as people are moving here that don't remember the good old days and can see what now has to offer, and younger people that are from here but don't remember the good old days and can see the benefits now. That conversation's changing, and that's really healthy. Morale is really increasing quickly. It's been really special to watch. But I think there's an acknowledgement that there's a vacuum and something needs to come and fill it. Now, let's come back to that word I used earlier, equalization, because from an economic perspective, Ontario is unequal economically. I'm going to use the housing market as my favorite example because I think that's indicative of other things. But when I moved here, a house cost 5 or 6 times more in Toronto than it did here. We were fair chunk below the national average. Toronto and Ottawa and Montreal were a fair bit above the national average. And it's always seemed to me, because we're only 2 hours away from Toronto, Ottawa, we're 3 hours from Montreal, we're an hour from Kingston. We're both central and not central, because we're sort of equidistant, right? We're about as far as we can get from everything, but not that far. It's always struck me as that's an equalization waiting to happen. If people can save money, or people can make their money work more efficiently, they will. That's just how economics works. It's almost a fluid. You can almost imagine it as a fluid that wants to, and that hasn't been happening. And the main reason is just jobs. There's not a lot of jobs here. They don't pay as well. Your dollar goes further out here, but they don't pay as well. But there's a lot of jobs in urban centers, and they do tend to pay well. And, we've seen the suburbs creeping out. We've seen people searching for more affordable housing in the cities, and they're putting up with longer and longer commutes, but it's really the commute that's the limit. 2 hours to Toronto or Ottawa is not actually that far. Like, I'd go into Toronto for a meeting without thinking about it, but I wouldn't go in every day. And so that's been the limit. People don't generally want to commute from further than, say, Ajax or Perth for Ottawa. But that's changed in the last year. It was going to change anyway. More and more people were talking about working from home. Office space is really expensive. Nobody likes commuting. A lot of people like working in their pajamas. Let's call it. It's nice to be able to pet your dog after the stressful meeting, or put a load of laundry in on your break, or whatever, and get 2 hours of your day back. I think the average commute is half an hour to 45 minutes in urban centers in Canada, but that means a lot of people are in the car for an hour, or more. So if you can get 2 hours of your day back, that's pretty special. And so, that was going to happen slowly. Businesses are very risk averse, and so they're not going to all jump on the bandwagon all at once and send all their employees home, because they don't know if that's going to work. They might think it's going to work, and they clearly did, but they don't know that, and businesses don't tend to take risks like that. But COVID has forced us to take the risk, and they have, and it's been successful. Not everybody's going to continue with it, but a certain number are. And, here's places like Tweed that have been asking for an economy, have been trying to figure out how to jumpstart an economy, and all of a sudden there is one. The problem is, it's not what we envisioned. And I think what we envisioned is largely just what we've had. But, what we've had is sort of manufacturing based. It's natural resources, or putting those natural resources together. But all that stuff has gone elsewhere, and it's probably not going to come back because it's expensive to do here. It's far less expensive if you put sort of all the manufacturing together, because then you don't have to take, one piece from Tweed to Kingston. You just, take that, whatever you've built, across the street to the other place. Transportation's expensive. So it doesn't make sense for that to come back. It doesn't make economic sense. But all of a sudden it makes a lot of economic sense for white collar workers to live out here. And that's never really happened. And this first generation is going to be urban white collar workers. They may be urban people with rural desires, but they're going to be people that are used to urban living. And that's not what we had envisioned. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it's unexpected. So I think what we've been experiencing is this equalization, but it was going to happen gradually, and it's happened overnight. In fact, it's happened while we've gone inside. We went inside in March last year. We've been told to stay there, and we're going to probably collectively come out of the house in the fall of 2021 sometime. And when we went in, we had one culture. When we've come out, we'll have something completely different. We're basically going to be rebuilding. And that could create a conflict. In fact, I suspect it will. Because, the culture that's already here is going to clash with the culture that's coming here. They're different. And there's different priorities there. And we've seen those communities where the cultures do clash. Prince Edward County, to me anyway, seemed like a knockdown, drag-out fight. It's largely over, but I think it's largely over because the urban culture has been victorious. But there's a possibility that we could work together if we communicate clearly, if we listen, if we don't look at this as adversarial. The temptation will be to look at it as adversarial, but we don't have to. And that's where the Pentecost story comes in, because, the Pentecost story has 2 points. One is it was the disciples' aha moment. They'd been with Jesus for 3 years. They'd gone through the roller coaster of the resurrection and crucifixion, and then after that, the question was, now what? There's 50 days between Pentecost and Easter, and they spent those 50 days just like wondering, okay, now what do we do with all this? They had the book knowledge, now they needed the practical knowledge. And Pentecost was the day that we commemorate as the Holy Spirit giving them that practical knowledge, descending on them and them going, okay, now we know what to do. And Peter preached the first Christian sermon that shows us that this is when they finally got it. The disciples don't traditionally get it, but Peter preached this sermon, and that's symbolic of the fact that they got it. The second point is inclusion. There was about 15 different linguistic groups present there. Jerusalem was a very cosmopolitan place for that time and era, or for that era. But the groups didn't necessarily get along. They would have been neighbors, but they would have been silos that probably looked at each other suspiciously. And this idea that the first time the gospel was preached by people, I remember this was from Jewish people that would have really believed that they were kind of it. They were the center. They were God's chosen people. It was these Jewish people that preached to all these other cultures. This was a symbol that we were all in it together, and that communication was key. Listening and speaking in each other's language was key. The point of Pentecost is to say that the gospel message, that justice and peace and all that stuff, it's beyond our wildest dreams. It's God's dream, which is more than we can even dream, and it's possible. And the way that it's shown is that we all hear it in our own language. It's possible because we come together. So we have a choice locally as we emerge into this culture of staying in our silos and looking at this adversarially. And a lot of rural communities have done this. It's the locals versus the city people. And that language is already out there here. There's already the odd little flashpoint where people are not seeing eye to eye. That's natural. Anytime people come together, that's going to be natural, and it takes time to build relationships and grow together. The problem is that what was going to happen over 15 years has happened in 15 months. And so, there's going to be a lot more friction. But our choice now is to figure out whether we get upset about housing prices and stuff like that, or the services that are demanded that we're not used to, or whatever, or whether we look at this as, this friction as the catalyst we need, the heat that we need to forge something new. If we can sort of grieve what's gone and sort of recognize that, that was a great time, but we're heading into something new. We're going forward, not backward. Then we can look at this as an adventure. And the next couple of months is a really exciting time. But if we cling to the old things, either the things in our rural past, or perhaps the things in our urban past, our recent urban past that we miss, we're going to butt heads, and we're going to create two solitudes. The key is going to be listening to each other and respecting the needs of each group. As a congregation made up fairly equally of sort of traditional and new people, And as a congregation that has a lot of ties in the community on all levels, we're in a really good position to say, to encourage this as an adventure rather than an adversarial endeavor. We are one of the places where communication is going to happen, and one of the groups where when we're out with our friends and whatnot, whenever that happens, we can steer the conversation in a more positive direction. And I think that's really our calling in the coming months. I think this is going to become more and more obvious, that we're on the forefront of this conversation, and other groups like us. And I think it's going to be really important that we lean into that.